Qin Dynasty. This was a very, very short-lived dynasty, but we still want to talk about it because it does set very important precedents for some of the future Chinese dynasties. So it actually only really lasts during one emperor's rule. We can see him here, Shi Huangdi. Now, this image of him, I think, is just so apropos because he was characterized as a very harsh and cruel ruler, and he just looks super angry here, so I like this. So as you can see, this is a really short period, 221 to 207 BCE. The Qin Dynasty was founded when Shi Huangdi defeated the remaining Zhou leaders as well as the nearby regional authorities. And then he took control of all of what used to be the Zhou dynasty and established his own. In some ways, we could say that the Qin dynasty is memorable because of the cruelty of Shi Huangdi, but also, like I was saying, he establishes some really important precedents that are going to be carried out even further by future Chinese leaders. Some of the things, just to generalize here, we see a more centralized government, not only established during the Qin, but also in the Han Dynasty afterwards in future dynasties. We also see that he starts to improve infrastructure. So he is credited with continuing the construction of the Great Wall. And also we see that there were some other really significant cultural projects that were completed under Shi Huangdi, such as the Terracotta Warriors. So, what kind of things did Shi Huangdi accomplish? So he called himself the first emperor of China, which gives us a sense of the significance of his rule. He centralized China's government first and foremost, so that's really significant, which means that the entire Qin dynasty was under his control. So that means he abolished local laws, and instead he appointed magistrates to replace local leaders. So we see a trend here in the classical era, right? We see bureaucratic rule in many places. We already talked about this in India, we talked about this in Persia. The idea is that at the end, ultimately everyone was subject to the emperor's rule, but in order to make his rule more reasonable, he appointed more local leaders, but he made sure that they were all loyal to the emperor. We also see his rule as being very harsh. He actually ordered the burning of books that were not in accord with the Qin beliefs. This is just an artist rendering of a book burning. And he also had hundreds of scholars executed, often burned alive, if they had beliefs that could challenge the Qin rule. Anyone, for that matter, who resisted his authority could either be executed or sent into exile. And dissenters, I guess if you could say if they were lucky, if they were not executed, they were also oftentimes sent very far away from their homes, sent very far north, and they were conscripted or drafted or forced, one could say, to start working on infrastructure projects, often working on the walls that were keeping out northern invaders. Now, as we know, these walls are eventually going to be joined together to form the Great Wall of China. So Shi Huangdi is actually credited with much of the construction of the Great Wall. It was not fully complete by the end of his rule, but before the Qin Dynasty, what becomes the Great Wall, it was a series of disjointed walls throughout the northern parts of China. As you can see in this map here, the Great Wall becomes much more unified. It's not complete, but it's definitely considerably improved. We also see that when the Great Wall was constructed, hundreds of thousands of workers were forced to work on it, and if they died while constructing it, they were actually buried inside the wall. So we again get a sense of Shi Huangdi's cruelty with thinking about the construction of the Great Wall. Other important accomplishments that were achieved during the Qin Dynasty, again, think it was super brief, but a lot changed. It grew in terms of size. The Qin Dynasty was larger in size than the previous Zhou Dynasty. What we see here is that in particular, the Qin Dynasty starts to expand south and also west. One important accomplishment also is that peasants were given land ownership rights. And one also really important accomplishment of the Qin is that we see a standardization of Chinese script or writing. You can see the images above, these represent the older characters of Chinese writing, and these were inconsistent. They varied considerably from place to place. After the Qin Dynasty is established, script is standardized, which meant it was the same no matter where you were. Now, this has obvious benefits. If the script is standardized, that meant everyone could read it no matter where you were in the empire. So it's going to facilitate communication, and it's going to facilitate trade. You also see that the Qin Dynasty standardized coins, and it also standardized weights and measures. So this also is going to facilitate trade because you don't have to exchange currency, and all the units of measurement are the same. And then he also establishes a more unified law code throughout China. And one of his most important accomplishments, which we already alluded to with the Great Wall, is his contributions to infrastructure. In addition to the Great Wall, he had many roads built and many canals built. This improves agricultural productivity, and it improves trade. So Shi Huangdi, after he dies, maybe arguably we see one of the most important accomplishments. Well, of course, it was underway before his death. And this is the Terracotta Army. And this is also really significant, and we're lucky that we have such a preserved archaeological record of this. One of the reasons why it's so well preserved is because it remained undiscovered until 1974. And when we did find it, we see, I mean, this doesn't even do it justice how large it really is. But the Terracotta Army was a huge army made out of terracotta or clay that was meant to guard Shi Huangdi in the afterlife. So there were over 7,000 soldiers that were created to form this army. And as you can see in this image on the right, every soldier, sorry, my mouse has a life of its own here. Every soldier was meant to be unique in appearance. So this shows us a couple of things. First off, it just shows us how intricate of a project this was, how long it must have taken, and how organized the labor behind it had to have been. And it also shows us that there really is a sense of realism behind Chinese art, something that we didn't see in the previous dynasties. They were really meant to look like unique individual people. And this is also important if we think that Shi Huangdi commissioned this building of this humongous army to protect him after his death. We can think this also shows us that the Qin Dynasty valued the afterlife. So then we can compare it to some of the previous more ancient empires like the Egyptians, who, as we know, constructed elaborate places to prepare their own leaders for the afterlife, right? They didn't truly believe that their leaders died or were completely gone, rather, after death, but that they continued to live in some other form. And that's why this army was necessary. So, as I said earlier, the Qin Dynasty is very short-lived. It collapses very shortly after Shi Huangdi's death. He dies in 210 BCE, and he is replaced by his son, but as you might remember, or as I discussed earlier in this video, Shi Huangdi was very cruel, and so he was not popular among his entire population. And so what we see is that there were some generals who decide that they want to use this opportunity after Shi Huangdi is dead to try to revolt against him, or rather his son, his replacement. And so there are going to be a series of generals who lead a revolt to try to overthrow the Qin family. And one of these generals is successful. He came from a family called the Han, which is why the next dynasty is named the Han Dynasty. And when he revolts against the son of Shi Huangdi, not only does he overpower Shi Huangdi's son, but then he also has his entire family killed to ensure that no Qin family members try to win back rule afterward. And after this leader conquers the Qin family, he sets up his own dynasty named after his family, the Han Dynasty, which is arguably even more important. It lasts longer. Many people see the Han Dynasty as the golden age of China, but the reason why we must not forget the Qin is because the Han Dynasty, in many ways, builds upon some of the accomplishments that started with the Qin. So we'll have one more video looking at the Han in just a moment. Stay tuned, and thanks.